It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Craig Kapitas is contributing editor to said Daily Beast. How are you?
Okay, Francois.
Also with us from Jerusalem, correspondent Iris Mockler. How are you holding up, Iris?
Holding up.
Okay, we'll leave it at that for now. Ana Navarro-Pedro is Paris correspondent for Portuguese media. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
How are you holding up?
Well, thank you.
Well, okay. Eric Randolph, culture editor for the French news agency AFP. Any strenuous assignments this week?
Difficult times meeting Bradley Cooper and Kerry Mulligan this week. Yeah, it's tough in my beat too.
Right. You can listen, like, and subscribe to The World This Week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever fine streaming service you so choose. The guns stayed silent for 7 days during which aid convoys went in while hostages came out of Gaza and Palestinian prisoners exited Israeli jails. Since Friday morning, though, when Hamas failed to deliver the daily quota of 10 women and children abducted on October 7th, the war returned with Israel pounding both the southern border city of Rafah and the central city of Khan Yunis.
Women were asleep with their children when the building was struck and they were trapped. We didn't do anything. We have a religion. We don't think of that stuff at all. We're not criminals. We're not terrorists. We just want to live in safety and want our children to feel safe.
Iris Mockler, does it feel like it's back to the way it was before?
Not quite, because the ground offensive hasn't resumed. It's airstrikes that have resumed. But otherwise, yes, everything is horribly familiar. There are sirens in Israel from the north, that is from the Lebanese border, and from the south, from the Gaza Strip. And there are airstrikes inside Gaza with the results that you can see on the screen. So, yes, it feels like that week could just disappear and be forgotten. That week off, I mean.
Yeah, the writing seemed on the wall on Thursday. The U.S. Secretary of State was back in Israel, no longer trying to push for a more permanent ceasefire, instead asking his host to try and spare civilian lives. Have you been able to piece together, Iris, why it unraveled when some had hoped for at least a few more days?
It seems to be both sides, while blaming the other, now concede that the issue was the release of the hostages. Israel understood that the deal was it would cease its fire as long as they were receiving 10 hostages, women and children, each day. And Hamas was finding it harder to produce those women and children. It offered the bodies of 3 hostages in one of the exchanges, day 4 or 5, I think. And Israel said no, it wanted live women and children. And on the last day, the list that was put forward didn't have women and children on it. I'm still not clear why Hamas is not putting forward women and children. Is it because, as it told the Wall Street Journal, or Hamas official told the Wall Street Journal, they simply can't find them? They don't hold them all, they can't find them. Or is it that they have been killed either in Israeli airstrikes or by Hamas or other militants? Or is it tactical? Do they actually want to keep some back for a moment later in negotiations when they can produce them and say, well, if you want these women and children, then you better give us what we want? It's just not clear. What they say is they want a broader hostage deal, which would include men. There would be a different ratio. It would no longer be 3-1 to return Palestinian male prisoners back to Gaza. So I don't know, but I do see that the fact that it's only airstrikes at the moment, that Israel's ground offensive hasn't resumed, maybe some sliver of hope that this could be. It could change. And by the way, Qatar, Egypt, and the US say they're working on it.
All right, so the good news, Ana Navarro-Pedro, is they're still talking. The bad news is, of course, the fighting's resumed. The latest claim on the Palestinian side is 178 killed this Friday.
Yes, the good news is that they are still talking and that diplomacy is still at work. Obviously, we can do all the analysis we want from what we know, but what we know is only the tip of the iceberg of what is going on down there in the Middle East. Just to remind you, there is one spy aspect to hold this tremendous, dramatic affair of war, which is when Hamas, on the 7th of October, raided Israel, attacked Israel. They attacked a military base, and they hold their position for more than a day. And what apparently is now a very confirmed fact in certain diplomatic and not only diplomatic circles is that they managed to get all the servers that were there. And there was a Shin Bet, apparently, anthem over there. So we don't know which information Hamas can have from taking those servers and taking all the information that was available in that military base. And that can be a big thing and, an undercurrent in the situation right now. Another thing is they say they've really captured very high-ranking officers as well. And so we don't know if Israel is willing to give them up, as some say, the Israeli press says that may be willing to give up their military hostages in order to pursue their military goals, or whether this is a point of conflict as well between Hamas and the government. We don't know actually who got the information. So these are just one tiny aspect of what many other facets of this conflict. And it's very, very, very complex. On top of it, we don't know how to put an end. We can't force you how to put an end, but that's the purpose of diplomacy. But honestly, 75% of Israelis are saying that they want Netanyahu, the prime minister, gone, and his government gone. And maybe that would be one of the first issues of the conflict.
Well, he's not gone yet, is he? Again, it's happening on lots of layers. Eric Randolph, your thoughts on the optics of it all right now, this return to war?
It all just feels tragically inevitable. And I think it's good to zoom out and remember that at no point in any of this week off did anybody start to talk about what kind of end game would look like, what kind of way of bringing any of this to real closure would look like, what plan there is for what happens to Gaza after this operation would look like. We're talking about, a decade or so ago, Hamas was holding one soldier, and that took years.
5 years.
5 years of diplomacy, and it ended up being exchanged for an enormous number of prisoners. That was one person. We're now talking about that on a unimaginably bigger scale. It just all feels so completely impossible to see a way out of this at the moment. We're sort of focusing on the details, which is what we have to do, and it's necessary, but it just feels further and further away from any kind of resolution.
Craig Kapitas?
I first covered the region in the late 70s. Been there, covered a lot of the stories since then. My take is there's nothing holy about the Holy Land, and there never has been. The only story in the Middle East is a narrative of hate, centuries upon centuries of bile, regularly reinfused with venom. And most of all, it's a story that desperately demands a new set of political characters on both sides. Now, let's be clear here. This is not going to happen in our lifetime, although one might hope. But I would suggest,
very optimistic panel tonight.
No, but I would suggest, and I'm sure we'll get phone calls, that people do not conflate the three H's, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, with the Palestinian cause. And in the same breath, do not conflate Israel's self-indulgent, radical, theological real estate developers with the Jewish people. And don't for a moment doubt that the Russians are behind this. Right. Now, until Netanyahu goes and all the monsters on the other side, this is going to continue. Finally, I haven't seen any change in the game plan since 1977. If someone else has, please tell me.
77, when there was the peace deal between Israel and Egypt. Of course, not everybody's about hate, thankfully, in the Middle East. Remember, for instance, Yocheved Lifshitz, the push for hostage releases, offering a chance for an update on this outspoken 85-year-old peace activist. She was freed a month ago. She was in Tel Aviv on Tuesday at a rally of families to demand the release of her still captive husband, Lifshitz, who told the news outlet Devar that in the first days of her ordeal, she actually met the Hamas commander, Yahya Sinwar. Quote, "I asked him how he wasn't ashamed of himself to do such a thing to people who for years supported peace. He didn't answer. He was quiet," Iris Machler.
She is remarkable, isn't she? She
is.
held a press conference on the day of her release. So she was released in the night, as we saw there in that footage. The next day, she held a press conference, the largest press conference that hospital has ever had, including during all the COVID times. And she spoke as if she had just emerged from her house on the kibbutz. So she's one of those remarkable women, one of the founders in some senses of the Israeli state, I guess, and a peace activist. And in and out of Gaza when she could go in, helping take people from Gaza who are treated in Israeli hospitals. They're just dumped at the border. Someone has to take them to the hospital. They can't afford a taxi. That was her job. She and her husband both did that. So she has an extraordinary commitment to a different view. You know, what Craig Kopitas says hasn't been seen here since 1977 was somehow in her heart. And she's undefeated by that experience and is still there for her husband and for all the other people, of course, who are still being held.
I just have one quick question, and I defer to Iris because she's there and we're not. But does this heroic lady have a chance of becoming the next prime minister or a senior official in the Israeli government who can go in and negotiate? I've met heroes like that before during my time there, and they are heroic and they are very strong. But it's an old story. I want to hear a new story, and that's what I'm not hearing.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Anwar Pedro.
I was going to say, on the positive side, we should also stress the incredible resilience of the Israeli citizens, because in spite of the shock, in spite of what they're suffering with this government, they are still in the situation of war. They are still a thriving democracy because the newspapers are investigating what happened on the 7th of October. They are putting responsibilities where they are regarding the military, regarding the government. They are doing incredible investigative journalism and fair journalism, which actually maybe it's more free speech or with more freedom than maybe some other democracies in the Western world right now. And the citizens are as well, of course, they want payback for what happened to them. But they also have a strong debate, a democratic debate amongst them as well on these issues. And I believe this is a tremendous positive aspect for Israel.
So maybe someone can come out of the lot. There was a big surprise this week in Israel. It came on Monday. The prime minister touring one of those kibbutzes targeted on October the 7th alongside Elon Musk. Yes, that Elon Musk, the one who just recently seemed to be endorsing an anti-Semitic conspiracy on his social medium, X, formerly Twitter. What was your reaction when you heard that story, Eric Randolph?
Well, it seems so obvious that he's just doing a little apology tour, but then if he's trying to win back the advertisers, the fact that he then showed up on a panel 2 days later, and I can't even repeat, I think, on TV what he said to those advertisers.
Oh, let's talk about it for a second. After Israel, yeah, this was. Let's call it up. This was in New York City, a conference hosted by the New York Times. Elon Musk letting loose against advertisers who'd fled Twitter, including Disney's boss Bob Iger. Well, you can guess what those asterisks are saying. Anyway, so yeah,
well, there it is.
There it is.
Hello. let's not beat around the bush.
Okay.
As he doesn't. I think the bigger picture here, I just want to always want to make the point that Elon Musk is the CEO that Twitter deserves. Anybody who gets upset about Elon Musk running Twitter has clearly not understood what Twitter is all about. He is the embodiment of Twitter. He's not running that company into the ground. He is exactly what Twitter is all about, being annoying. And it's the point of Twitter. And he is he is that.
But still, he needs money to run the company. So when he went to Israel, I believe that actually he was just trying to save his company, from...
Does he need money, or is that just part?
I heard he went to Israel because I was told he was looking for a moil. But I mean, look, with Musk, people who find themselves to be exiles, in this world are mighty inclined to believe themselves to be citizens of another. This is why people go to Jerusalem, and so Musk goes to Jerusalem, and Jerusalem historically has always been the launching pad for this kind of thing. So are we surprised that it's going there?
Are you saying he's messianic?
Hell yes. I think he is. You pointed out, I think it's germane to point out when you and I were talking about earlier that you thought he was going there to sell his Starlink or offer up his Starlink. And Francois and I were talking about this off camera, and I think it's really important. We didn't know the answer. Maybe one of you do.
Well,
is there something else other than Starlink?
Because we have two questions for you, Aris. First off, we heard the Israeli communications minister saying that there was a deal in the pipeline over Elon Musk's Starlink satellite internet provider, the terms and conditions under which it could be used both in Israel and in the Gaza Strip. Could that have been the purpose of the trip? And then I got a second question for you.
That could be part of the purpose, certainly, because in late October, I believe that's right, in late October, there was a suggestion that Starlink would be available to Gaza, and the same minister was saying, no, that's impossible, we can't have it. And now, after this visit, it's been suggested that Starlink will be made available to Gaza with some Israeli supervision or some terms that suit both sides like that, or don't suit Gaza as well as Israel, but Israel will have a hand in seeing where it should go. And then, yes, that's a possible deal, isn't it?
And then the other question, why did Benjamin Netanyahu give him that tour of the kibbutz?
Well, that's a question that's being asked, but from a different perspective in Israel as well. That kibbutz is one of the few on the Gaza border that was completely destroyed and overrun on October the 7th. So there he is, taking him basically to a horror site. And there aren't very many people from the kibbutz there. And the kibbutz members didn't know because they're not there anymore. They're in different parts of the country. And they're saying, why hasn't he met with us? Why isn't the Prime Minister coming to see us and have meetings with us, and instead bringing him here as if it's some kind of prop? They really felt that their kibbutz, Kfar Aza, was being used as a prop.
But what's in it for Netanyahu?
It's an excellent question. Another thing people here were asking, unless he wants the Starlink deal as well, is how, there has been an explosion of anti-Semitic content on Twitter during this war, very damaging to Israel, some of which Musk himself has signed up to. Why would Netanyahu invite him here and show him this? None of it's clear to me, but there has been a lot of criticism of Netanyahu for this visit.
What about the Starlink thing? I mean, I think it's a valid and vital question here. Is Elon Musk the only one who builds this Starlink or a unit that actually works like it? Yeah. I mean, everyone's treating this Starlink thing like it's the Holy Grail, and Elon Musk is, Sir Galahad.
Yeah, it's a private citizen. Shouldn't this be government work, Eric Randolph?
Yes.
Well, yes, exactly. But that before he was the Twitter troll in chief, he was actually an amazing force for getting things done, and it's more a example of the tragedy.
Better than
of
the public sector.
Exactly, it's the tragedy of how bad public sector innovation is.
Remember that he recently just put Starlink under the supervision of American military, the Pentagon.
Yeah.
Is there an alternative to Starlink? No one seems to be able to answer this question.
So there are small alternatives, not one with this dimension.
Well, that's pretty darn chilling. If that is true, that's darn chilling.
That's the state of the world. Yeah.
All right. One final point on this. By the way, when the Middle East erupts, it steals the limelight, even when the planet's burning. Cue images of Israel's President Yitzhak Herzog conferring with the United Arab Emirates crown ruler Mohammed bin Zayed, aka MBZ, at the annual UN Climate Summit in Dubai. We mentioned at the outset how they're still talking. Iris Makler, your thoughts on just how much can be done when these world leaders meet at a time like this?
I think everybody has their different aims. Yitzhak Herzog also met with the Emir of Qatar. There's a photo of them shaking hands. That's a first. You know, they don't actually really have diplomatic relations out in the open like that, even though there are visits and so forth, including the Mossad leader who goes there to negotiate this hostage deal, for example. But that was a first. I don't know if it will appear on Al Jazeera, but I think everybody has their COP28, their environmental aims. And then, as we see here, they also have their diplomatic aims. And I think that's definitely what the Israeli president was doing there.
About that little issue of off-the-charts global warming, COP summits rotate between regions, and it happened to be the Middle East's turn for a summit that is so crucial for issues like climate finance and concrete targets for curbing carbon emissions. Still, it's a little unsettling when the chair of such a summit is the boss of Emirati state oil company ADNOC, and he's having to deny at the outset the BBC report that he'd used his gavel to cut business deals.
I pledge that I will run an inclusive and transparent process, one that encourages free and open discussion between all parties. I ask you to start this COP with a different mindset. I ask you to adopt a different way of thinking. And I ask you to be flexible.
Oh, you skeptical members of the Fourth Estate, can you adopt a different method of thinking? Anna Navarro-Petro.
I was thinking that they are so good. They are West, United States and European Union are usually very good at double standards. And I think that we just got an example of a really professional double standard there.
But you have the UN Secretary General who said, look, these COP summits, if we want to get anywhere, we're going to have to negotiate with the oil lobby. So why not have?
Why not having them in your field? I don't know. OPEC just decided to cut like 1 million barrels of petrol a day, I believe, of oil a day production. But it's not because of climate change. It's because they want the price of oil to go up, and it's too low for them right now. So, the planet is going to suffer still.
Have NBC call me when solar energy can run one of his desalination plants, and we'll talk.
Eric Randolph.
I think the most depressing thing I saw out of COP was they were talking about creating a fund to help poorer countries, developing countries, to deal with the impacts of climate change. And America has decided to provide $17.5 million. $17.5 million. I work in the culture sector. I quite often work with films that cost $200 million. And $17.5 million seems like the most pathetically small amount of money to help the world cope with climate change.
Why is that?
And they haven't even cleared Congress with that. There's a good chance Congress will probably block even that piddly amount of money. I was one of the few people who liked the new Indiana Jones film, which cost $300 million. I don't think that film is going to save the world from its burning future.
It's the age-old argument, though, isn't it, between those who worry about the end of the world and those who worry about the end of the month.
Well, yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's the problem of leaving this problem in the hands of politicians. Who,
although it is getting serious. I mean, COP28, a chance, and we've been doing it all week here on France 24, to throw the spotlight on just how off the charts, how much record-breaking extreme weather we have had. Dateline Cuba, France 24's team, filed a story earlier this week about how extreme weather, you listening, Craig Kapitas, is threatening the viability of farming tobacco. The Cuban cigar,
I know,
is in danger of.
I know of this intimately. I was with some of our Cuban cigar guys in Miami last week. It is desperate. And if that $17 million goes to anything, it should go directly to the Cuban cigar industry. But that's not going to happen. The question is, why only $17 million? And then the way to find that answer is, what are these poor, impoverished, however the adjective country is described, what countries are they? I'd like to see a list. And what you're going to see is congressmen on both sides of the aisle. They're going to look at this list, and guess what? These are going to be corrupt countries run by corrupt dictators, and no one wants to give them money because although the heart's in the right place, once the money gets there...
But for the climate finance bill, for instance, they've agreed to what the U.S. wanted, which means it's going to be going through via the World Bank. There was pushback at the beginning against that.
It's going to go through the World Bank.
So can't they vet the money to make sure that
the only way you can... Wall Street Journal, former Wall Street Journal reporter talking here. The only way you can vet money is at the source of its expenditure. So unless there's actually someone on the ground in, let's say, the Democratic Republic of Congo, monitoring where the money goes and ensuring it's going to the right place, no matter who is doling it out, the World Bank or Anna, who I know you're a good soul.
I'm not corrupt.
You're not. You're not. But that's the whole issue. That's the whole point. Good people of good faith want to give money to help out. Everyone does. It's when they start doling it out to the poltroons and the poobahs in these corrupt countries where it goes sour. That's the issue, and we've never been able to solve it.
All right, to Iris Mockler and those following the Middle East, this is going to seem like a recent argument. Since the 19th century, when the occupying Ottomans let Lord Elgin take away the Parthenon sculptures, Athens has wanted them back. It was not on the agenda this time when the Greek Prime Minister visited London, but all it took was a question on the BBC Sunday Morning Politics show for Rishi Sunak to cancel his meeting with Kyriakos Mitsotakis.
We feel that these sculptures belong to Greece and that they were essentially stolen. But this is not, in my mind, an ownership question. This is a reunification argument. Where can you best appreciate what is essentially one monument? I mean, it's as if I told you that you would cut the Mona Lisa in half, and you would have half of it at the Louvre and half of it at the British Museum. Do you think your viewers would appreciate the beauty of the painting in such a way? Well, this is exactly what happened with the Parthenon.
Actually, Iris Mockler, we had a classic scholar from Oxford saying it would be more akin to if you took half of Stonehenge and brought it to France.
Great idea.
Yes. And you know, I'm quite apart from the actual content story, it's one of the few things that I've actually seen myself in the British Museum. And the guy there said to me, who was just kind of, I said to him, is this the one? And he said, yes, you know, the Greeks want it back, but we're just going to be very quiet here and they don't have to get it. So that's the view of the guy guarding them at the British Museum. And he seems to be smarter than Rishi Sunak. Why would you create a problem like this for yourself politically? Even the Greek Prime Minister said maybe in the end it was just as well that he cancelled the meeting with me because it's given this issue more daylight than it would have had, more attention than it would have had otherwise. So, you know, my conclusion when I look at this story is that maybe Rishi Sunak is just not a very good politician.
Eric Randolph.
The Rishi's, yes, I would tend to agree with that. The British government feels like a twitching corpse that is just tragically not dying. And if someone could just come along and shoot it in the head, and yet we have to wait probably another year for an election. What I don't understand about this story is who is Rishi Sunak trying to impress in the electorate? Because this knuckle-dragging cenotaph huggers that he's probably that might get upset about nationalist issues in the UK and not spending their weekends at the British Museum going to, you know, pay homage to the Elgin Marbles. I don't think there's anybody who isn't being paid to care about this issue in Britain who actually does care about this issue. Just give them back. My God.
His Prime Minister spokesperson said this could be a slippery slope for the British Museum.
A slippery slope. Yes, but the British Museum has been on a slippery... I mean, it started the slippery slope by stealing a bunch of Greece's marbles 200 years ago.
You put your finger on it with the word centaur, because you know what the frieze is. It's a parade of scenes that have naked people cavorting with senators. That's what the heist was all about, 65 crates. And they were very clever. Your people were very, very clever about it. You know, they waited for the Ottomans to take it off. Then Elgin bought them from the Ottomans to impress his girlfriend back in England. And then he went broke and he had to sell them. And then that's when the Brits got really clever. They said, you know where we're going to hide them? In a museum. No one's going to think to look there. You know, and I, you know, how many English people have ever gone to see them? I've gone to see them. There's a little sign there that says, these are from Greece.
Yes.
You know, I think we should send in 300, I happen to be Greek, I think we should send in 300 Spartans and take them back and pillage the British Museum gift shop while we're at it.
Anna Navarro Petro.
Going back to Sunak, really is not a politician. Not only he put the light again on the spot on Parthenon Marbles, but also so far, all governments have pushed the hot potato to the British Museum, saying that's not our responsibility. Responsibility is theirs. It's a British Museum. It's private. You know, you deal with them. And now he has pushed the responsibility back to the government. It's really, really, really silly, and it's double silly. Greece is the first ally of the United Kingdom in the Mediterranean, and United Kingdom does need an ally right now in the Mediterranean. So, really, really silly. Those public schools in England, really.
Yeah, because they're like-minded conservatives. They're both from the same sort of political.
Yeah.
Exactly, and the two countries have an alliance. But I'm saying the education provided by those public schools seems to be rather poor. Before him, they had Boris Johnson, now Sunak. Not a very good record.
All right, let's switch gears here. He was the ultimate elder statesman. Decades after he broke the ice between the U.S. and Communist China, rushed to Israel's defense in the 1973 Kippur War, bombed Cambodia, and made peace with North Vietnam, Henry Kissinger, who passed away this week at his home in Connecticut at the age of 100, was still being called upon for advice. Yeah. Back in 2009, France 24's Robert Parsons asked the former Cold Warrior about that sudden moment when the Cold War was no more.
Well, I thought in an historic sense it would happen. I was stunned, and I then watched for a day on television from Hawaii the outpouring of one of the few genuine moments where people came across both sides of the dividing line.
I think back to the beginning of our discussion, Iris Makler, and the whiff of pessimism on our panel when it comes to your part of the world. Things don't happen until they suddenly happen. When you listen to Henry Kissinger, do you think peace may break out?
I don't know if what he was saying is applicable here. I do know that it's quite interesting because many people here have been speaking about him, his role in the 1973 war, the protests against him when he came here after that war, the feeling that he had betrayed Israel, the right-wing protesters, by the way, many of whom became the politicians, the right-wing protesters then, the politicians of today. And the kind of theme has been that you'd sometimes need an outsider with some of your interests at heart, but the broader picture in order to deliver peace. I have to say that's quite different from my Facebook feed where his name and war criminals seem to be, sorry, my Twitter feed, his name and war criminals seem to be the most associated thing that I've seen. And there was one Twitter feed called "Is Henry Kissinger dead yet?" And every day for 2 years, they've been writing no, and today they could write yes, and that seemed to be very make them very happy. So I think he's remains a polarizing figure even at his death at the age of 100.
Yeah, not everyone's a fan. Chile's left-wing president retweeting his ambassador to Washington 50 years after the Kissinger-backed coup that's brought a brutal military dictatorship to that country, a man whose historical brilliance never managed to hide his deep moral misery, has died. Ana Navarro Pedro, your thoughts?
We had many dealings in Portugal with Kissinger. 73, he was doing what was called then the scuttle diplomacy, going from capital to capital in the Middle East during the Yom Kippur War. And Portugal was very important to America because our islands, our archipel in the middle of the Mediterranean.
Still a military dictatorship at the time.
Still a military dictatorship, good one, at the time. And many of the planes going to Israel would land in Azores, in the middle of their flight. Then democracy came to Portugal the next year, 74, and Kissinger was not happy with it. He thought Portugal would be taken over by the communists, by the Reds. He sent a warship in front of Lisbon that would bomb us in 75 if we didn't comply with his vision of the world. And he was saying Portugal will be a Cuba, a vaccine for Spain and Italy, because we are going to take them out of NATO, we are going to attack them. And thanks goodness there was a Sicilian in the United States, Frank Carlucci. He was head of the CIA, or very up in the CIA, and he was named ambassador to Portugal. And he arrived to Portugal, and Kissinger, the German, was Eastern Europe, was all in the whole his thing with the Reds, and and he comes to Portugal, Carlucci, and first thing he says, he goes, first day, he makes an appointment. He invites for lunch all the Reds, the military. That he invites them for lunch, and Sicilian, he sees what's going on and he arranges things, smooths things out. Kissinger was not happy. I don't know why.
All right, writing in the Daily Beast, Craig Capitas, you recant your sometimes friendly, sometimes fractious encounters with said Henry Kissinger. Kissinger was the professor with whom you disagreed on every moral ground imaginable, and then did whatever it took to become one of his students. I believe the cartoonist Doonesbury even had a running line on that, where kids are taking his class at Georgetown while boycotting him at the same time.
Yeah, you had. There were two ways to. There were two roads in Dr. K's world. One, you could listen and learn, or you could carp and be crushed, because he had a huge intellect. And he was very smart, and you really had to do your homework, even if you asked him a question at a press conference. But in private, he was one of the funniest guys I ever met, and a wonderful teacher. You learned a lot from him. He asked you lots of questions. Now, there were two ways to walk with him. You could walk that way, or you could go down the road of, the human rights activists and the paladins of peace, and that's quite reasonable. But as a reporter, as a writer, as a journalist, that is the road that I went down with Dr. K. I didn't need to rail against him about what happened, what he did in Chile, Cyprus, and everywhere else. We all knew that. Cambodia, I lived through it as a college student. So that was the way. He loved the celebrity as well.
He, at the age of 15, is forced to flee Nazi Germany, returns working as an interpreter for U.S. military intelligence during the war. When you speak with him, what sort of, because he always was somebody who honed in on the notion of power, who had power, how power worked. Where did he seem to get that from?
I think from growing up. I mean, we never discussed that very notion. What he felt, and I mean, I write about it a bit in my story. For example, he said if you wanted to understand someone, specifically if you want to understand the Russians, he said don't read Mein Kampf, read Dostoevsky, and that's really true. And Kissinger had a very he was like Metternich. He had a very clever way of I'm going to make up an expression which half of our audience probably wouldn't understand and the other half will laugh at. Literary politics. He looked at things through literature and culture as well as through the hard lens of political reality. Okay. For someone like Kissinger, one of the discussions we had about, when he dealt with the Russians, that he didn't read the speeches of Gromyko. I mean, he looked at them, but what he read was his Turgenev and his Dostoevsky, because he felt that was the way to really nail them. That was the way to get to them.
And you heard Anna Navarro-Petra talking about shuttle diplomacy, and just to give a sense of how Kissinger's name became associated with that term, French comics magazine Pilote famously once put him on its cover dressed as Tintin, with the intrepid Belgian reporter's fateful dog, Snowy. There he is off to, and you've got the names on his suitcase, of course, Eric Randolph, of all the places he wants to go to.
Yeah, I think the thing, you know, he had such a long career, it's so easy to pick out parts of it that are horrendous, parts of it that were incredibly impressive moments of diplomacy. I think the fact that he always saw the danger of being self-righteous. He saw self-righteousness as so deadly to foreign policy. And I think so much of what has gone wrong in American foreign policy in the last 30 years has been because it forgot that lesson from Kissinger when it failed to see that foreign policy is about hard power and it's about making the most of what the situation allows and not thinking that you have the moral high ground all the time.
And that America was the policeman of the world based on his upbringing.
Yes. And you know, that's such an important lesson. And he also made the point, which I think is very important, which is that journalists have the luxury of moralizing, whereas politicians have to deal with the real world as it is. So I think there's a moment of humility.
The Danish press, just very quickly, recalled something very interesting. When Kissinger met Mao Zedong, the leader of China, Mao Zedong looked at him, apparently asked him, "How come a plain man like you can have such success with the ladies?" That was the language at the time. And apparently he answered, you're going to like it, Craig. He apparently answered, "Oh, you know, power is an aphrodisiac."
It's true.
Speaking of legends, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Elliot Erwitt was a man of very few words. His camera indeed did the talking. The genial Magnum agency photographer who immortalized everything and everyone from Marilyn Monroe to pigeons in the park has passed away at the age of 95. Back in 2010, a very younger version of me had the daunting task in this very studio of asking Elliot Erwitt about what his legacy was.
Do you want to be remembered as the guy who photographed Che Guevara, or as the guy who photographed a dog wearing a silly hat?
That's a tough question. As the person have photographed a dog with a silly hat.
And why is that?
I think because a lot of people have photographed Che Guevara, but not many people have photographed a dog with a silly hat. Maybe not.
We'll put the question to you another way.
Okay.
Was it tougher getting the picture of Che Guevara or the picture of the dog?
Well, it was different. Che Guevara was quite willing to have his picture taken, and the dog was sort of ambivalent.
Eric Randolph.
Yeah, wow, what a legend. Yes, that's fantastic. I don't think I can add anything to that. I think he's answered that about as
cut it
properly
there.
as
It was this from the same man who took pictures of Nixon and Khrushchev arguing in the famous kitchen debate.
Erwin?
Yes, Elliot Erwitt. Yeah.
Yes, you know, I love his stuff because it's so whimsical and a little bit quirky, and the dogs are as important as the important people, and that's what comes across to you. Not only Marilyn Monroe looking seductive, or a real moment of history caught at the funeral of JFK, but that small moment that another person might walk by, but that he actually sees, I think is what makes him so well-rounded and makes him so charming and makes him so much missed today.
We'll have to leave it there, unfortunately. Iris Makler, so many thanks for joining us from Jerusalem. I want to thank as well Ana Navarro-Pedro, Craig Kapitas, Eric Randolph. Thank you for being with us here in The World This Week.